What does the Pacers draft mean for their free agency plans? Do any of their moves have any effect on anybody who could or could not be back? What decisions were made Friday? What's coming Saturday? Free agency's right around the corner. Woo! There's a lot to talk about in Pacerland, and we'll get to it on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Saturday. Got to do bonus pods. The roster moves are coming, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we have a lot to talk about. More on the draft and what it means for the Pacers' upcoming week of free agency. Whew. Maybe less than I originally thought, but we'll see as we dive into it. Plus other moves that happened on draft night that I either thought were interesting or I would have done if I were running the Pacers. Storylines to watch the next couple days ahead of the 30th. There's a lot to get to. Decisions are reportedly being made or not reportedly being made about players and their player options and the guarantees and everything. And we're going to cover it all on this shorter weekend bonus Locked On Pacers. Let's start with the draft. If you're wanting more on the Pacers in action the first night or their picks last night, Johnny Furphy, Tristen Newton, and Enrique Freeman. Yesterday's shows for you with analysis from our Locked On hosts who covered Newton and Furphy in college. Today, we'll look forward a little bit. We'll dive into those players in mid-July when the action dies down and Summer League is over. Let's start with what the Pacers draft picks could mean for free agency, right? Every year they pick a player or two that maybe signals a bit about what to expect for the Pacers in the coming free agency period, who could or could not be retained. If you'll recall, years ago when they traded Aaron Holiday to get the Isaiah Jackson pick, it was pretty clear that night that, okay, TJ McConnell's probably more likely to re-sign than Doug McDermott, right? That was a very revealing one of many instances where the draft was telling for what was coming for the Pacers in the free agency period, and that has remained the case many times throughout the years of the Pacers. The only one that was not particularly revealing was the Goga Bitadze pick, but year after year, you can tell something about, here comes Jarris Walker, and they're finally going for fours, or okay, here comes Ben Mathurin, Buddy Hield might have a different role. You understand stuff, you can see what's coming, and so let's start with the draft from last night. I think Furphy is very interesting as a starting point because he plays the same position as Doug McDermott and Kendall Brown, and there is at least a decent projection of him as a shooter. Not a great one yet. We'll see. I want to see him play more before I say anything about how I feel about it because, again, I haven't had time to watch him yet, but shot it okay in college, and a lot of people say he looks like a good shooter. Stats say he's a good spot-up guy and good in transition, and he's a wing-sized player. So naturally you gravitate towards wings, towards shooting. And the thought with the Pacers already is, and Jaylen Smith matters for this calculation, but they only have 3 or 4 roster spots, and you bookmark one of them for Furphy, and you bookmark one of them for Obi Toppin, and maybe one for James Johnson. Maybe not. We'll see. And then if Smith opts out, you might want a third big as the Pacers. There's your whole team. You're done. And so that does not leave a spot for Doug McDermott, right? That would be one interpretation of the move we just saw where they draft Johnny Furphy is they have a new younger wing in the door and they would lose one out the door. Now, the other interpretation could be, and again, I don't even know how the Pacers feel about keeping Doug McDermott. Caitlin Cooper and I both predicted on our player season review that it made less sense to keep him this summer, given how his season went and how his apparent fit looked like on the floor. As a good shooter, if he's on a minimum deal or is not expected to play, it's fine, but that's not what we're here to start talk about. If they decide to keep McDermott, though, Furphy in for Kendall Brown's spot also could make sense. I bring that up to say it's possible already that both of them are gone, and I think the addition of Furphy only increases those to the mix, right? I think that the chances that one or both of Doug McDermott and Kendall Brown are on the opening night roster next season took a hit. I'm going to go back to something I talked about on yesterday's show. Julian Phillips, right? He was the 35th pick last year where Furphy just went. And he signed with the Bulls on a 4-year deal, over $8 million, but only $5.7 million guaranteed. I bring that up to say his first year salary in that contract was $1.6 million. even if that doesn't sound like a lot, it's not. That's $500,000 less than Kendall Brown. And so if you're the Pacers managing your resources and thinking about what you need to do to keep top end, and maybe Jaylen Smith opts in, we'll see. Again, we'll talk about him in a minute. That savings could matter. That could allow you to do something later in the season with your mid-level exception, or make a different kind of trade to create a trade exception. There's just a lot of ways that it could, in theory, be something that matters. And so I think Kendall Brown and Doug McDermott, a wing getting picked, does not bode well for them in free agency. Those would be the two most direct hits, I think. It also makes like a veteran addition on the wings less important if they're going to replace one of them. So positionally, I think the biggest losers from the Pacers' best pick of the draft would be those two guys who are already guys that I think their future, or at least their offseason prospects of returning or getting some money guaranteed, were already tough. But Kendall Brown, again, just guessing based on his guarantee dates, would have a chance in summer league or in training camp if he makes it that far to prove that he belongs on the team. His contract is still very cheap and only very lightly guaranteed until January 7th. So we'll see where that ends up heading, but that would be my Furphy analysis. Tristen Newton at pick 49, a point guard. They like point guards on two ways, or the guards in general on two ways. If you would like to go back through the years for proof, it's not very hard to look at Devon Reed and Edmund Sumner one year, and then the next year they have Nazmi Trulong, and then the next year they had guards until they had to waive them for Amita Brima, and they had Jalen LeCue, and then the next year they had Gabe York. And before Gabe York, they had Dwayne Washington, and I keep going through the years. Gabe York again the next year, two ways, and the guards. Trevelin Queen. Am I missing anybody? Isaiah Wong last year. It makes sense to have that. If you can develop a ball handler, that's great. If you can have, and if you have an emergency at point guard, you need someone who can do something, that knows your system, that doesn't suck. They learned that the hard way with Brad Wanamaker in 20, whatever that was. They let him go for Kiefer Sykes, who was also on a two-way, I believe. I can't remember what his contract status was, but they needed a point guard at all. So Tristen Newton on a two-way makes a lot of sense given their history. I only say that to say, if there was a chance Isaiah Wong was going to be retained, it probably hit zero when Newton got picked, because now they have that point guard on a two-way, and they made another pick right after, which also would eat into a two-way slot. I already thought Wong's chances of being back were pretty low. He got picked very late in the draft. He was the 55th pick last year. 55, I believe 55. He was a very late pick last year. Didn't do a ton for the Mad Ants. Only played in 2 games for the Pacers, and one doesn't even show up in the stats because of the in-season tournament championship game. I don't think he made enough progress in the ways they would have needed him to want to keep him. And they already are running into two-way spot numbers. So Isaiah Wong, but via the Tristen Newton pick, unlikely, I would say, to be retained, and maybe a hit on Quentin Jackson's chances of being retained, although he was the best of the Pacers two-way players, in my opinion, by the end of the season. So perhaps he could still steal the third one. Enrique Freeman doesn't have a ton of, to me, direct hits. He doesn't play the same position as Shibwe or any of the guards who are on two-way deals last year. I don't think he's going to get a full roster spot for the Pacers this year, unless he's like incredible in summer league or something like that. So that one seems less impactful. Maybe you could view it as depth behind Obi Toppin, Pascal Siakam, and Jarris at the 4, and they feel less inclined to add an external free agent there. But in terms of who they did pick, I would say the biggest losers on the Pacers when it comes to upcoming free agency would be Kendall Brown, Doug McDermott, Quentin Jackson, and Isaiah Wong. And they did not add another two-way guy, so they have an open slot, so it's possible they keep one of their two-way guys from last year. But those would be the guys that I think are, the most impacted by the free agents, or the draft moves the Pacers made when it comes to free agency. Some guys had good days, or some guys had days that at least make their considerations different going forward in terms of how they'll think, how they'll be considered by the Pacers. Let's get to those guys next. Before we do that, though, we're going to talk about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers to roof racks to exhaust kits to LED headlights and plenty more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. We are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Locked On Mavs and Locked On Pistons for your second listen. Tim Hardaway on the move with 3 second rounders for Quentin Grimes. Hate that trade for the Pistons. Kuka Hill will have more on Locked On Pistons. Great for the Mavs, who actually got a good player who's young and can now keep Derrick Jones Jr. So the draft is over. The Pacers made some picks. And you know who they didn't pick in the draft? Anyone who's a center. Maybe Enrique Freeman one day will be billed as a center, but I would not currently slot him there. It's possible. I have no idea. I need to watch him before I make any sort of decisions on that. Regardless, I bring all this up to say Jaylen Smith was one of the most interesting players to me entering the draft and the considerations for the Pacers. He has a player option deadline that, if you're listening to this, is actually today. It is June 29th. And today, right now, I'm talking. It's 3:12 p.m. on June 28th. I bring that up to say, perhaps by the time this podcast posts, this is outdated because of how fast these deadlines come. But Michael Scotto reported a couple weeks ago that the early indications were that Jaylen Smith was going to opt out. And he also reported today that there's a chance, or he reported today that he's going to opt out. I retweeted it onto my feed. He said, Pacers forward Jaylen Smith is declining his $5.4 million player option. But then Scott Agnes reported just after, I'm trying to find all these tweets very quickly, that Jaylen Smith has not finalized a decision regarding his player option. That was about an hour ago to right now. So I bring all that up to say, that's still, as of me talking right this second, maybe not when this is published, but me talking right this second, TBD. I could not get any confirmation that he chose to opt out. At this time, again, we'll see. I'm sorry to do too much detail on Jaylen Smith. You're going to hear a segment about Jaylen Smith on tomorrow's podcast for sure. So the draft was interesting to me with him because I wondered if there was a chicken and the egg situation going on here with Smith. His player option day was after the draft, right? And so there are a lot of things for him to consider in free agency. Money is obviously a factor, but so is playing time, and so is a potential starting spot and proximity to home and all sorts of stuff that players consider when they're picking their new team. And Jaylen Smith, I don't know where the Pacers currently view him, but was the backup center a lot of last season. If he knew he'd be the backup center in Indiana, maybe he'd opt in. Maybe he thinks he can get more money by opting out. He shot very well last year, right? Scotto straight up in his tweet put his percentages in there because he shot it extremely well from the field. 59.2% from the field, 42.4% from deep. I'm all over the place right now. Jaylen Smith is relevant because I wondered in the draft if he would look around and say, oh, they didn't pick a center. Now I have a better chance of being the backup. Maybe I'll stay. Versus if the Pacers did pick a center, he could opt out and say, oh, they have too many centers. They might not prioritize me this year. But the other thing was, if he opted out before the draft, the Pacers' chances of picking a center or a need for a center would have gone up in the draft, right? So there's a little bit of like chicken and the egg, what came first scenario of, do the Pacers pick a center to get him to opt out if they want him to? Do they pick a center because they think he's opting out? Do they not pick a center because they think he's opting in? Or do they not pick a center because if he opts out, they can save some money there? There's so much interesting dynamic to me between those two things. They did not pick a center in the draft. And so should Jaylen Smith opt out, you could consider him a winner for this, for the Pacers in free agency, right? I put good day for sticks in my notes instinctively after the draft yesterday. Instinctually, whatever. I cannot get this segment straight. And if he wanted to stay, if his gut feeling wanted him to stay, but maybe it wasn't his best long-term decision, not picking a center certainly helped Jaylen Smith, I would say. But if you're the Pacers and you have to think about the tax and how that's going to look with Obi Toppin, and can you add any other players besides Toppin? If Smith opts in and you're close to the tax, you have to roster spots. If he opts out and you have Myles Turner and Isaiah Jackson and you're comfortable going small with Toppin or Siakam at the 5, you might be okay with him opting out and then not re-signing. And if you're Jaylen Smith, then you can get close to what you're making now, but with another team, but you guarantee yourself playing time, or you can get, I'm making these numbers up. I have no idea what Jaylen Smith's free agency is going to look like. What if he can get 2 for 10 somewhere else, right? And if the Pacers, he'd get 1 for 5.4, but then maybe not play as much and then not be able to get 4.6 next year, right? If he can get 2 for 10, is that worth it to him? So there's a lot for him to consider about not just this year, but his long-term earnings because he's young and possibly playing time, right? Because he could be the third center for the Pacers. I've rehashed this a lot and we'll go into more detail on it once his decision is finalized. But if you're the Pacers, you might be okay with that because of your proximity to the tax. If he opts out, you get more flexibility to keep topping and maybe add another like interesting enough player that could actually help you should they be needed. And you'd have more resources to potentially fill the third center role on the team. So the fact that they didn't draft a center was interesting to me, and I wondered what dynamic that would have with Smith. We still don't know as of me talking right this second. But I do think if his gut wanted him to stay with the Pacers, regardless of his contractual future, them not picking a center was a good day for him specifically. Everyone else on the team, free agency is not really a key factor. I don't think Obi Toppin had any change in his outlook from the draft. They did not pick a 4. Furphy's not playing right away at his position. And the other free agents on their team were not really dependent on the draft, which is only James Johnson of the guys left. And TJ McConnell wasn't getting waived anyway. So also, this episode's coming out on the 29th, maybe earlier on the 28th. I haven't even checked to someone on this. So there's a chance that the next 20 seconds of me talking looks super dumb, but the Pacers would look super dumb in turn. TJ McConnell's contract becomes fully guaranteed at midnight tonight, 9 hours from now. This episode might even be up before that. He's not going to get waived. It's just pointless. He would make $9.3 million this coming season. He gets $5 million of that either way, and you can't do better with $4.3 million than TJ McConnell, and that's all they would save, and they're over the cap, and they can't replace him. They're not going to waive him. There's nothing even to say. There's nothing even for me to check on. Congrats to TJ McConnell on getting his contract guaranteed. His extension is actually much more interesting than his guarantee date, and we all know that. They did pick a point guard, but not one who's going to be good, likely during McConnell's contractual time with the Pacers. Not much more to add on that. So I bring that up to say that's everybody who has free agency implications for the Pacers. McConnell, Smith, Kendall Brown, Doug McDermott, Obi Toppin, James Johnson in the 2-ways. So the winners, by a small margin, Jaylen Smith. And the losers, McDermott, Brown, all the 2-way guys, basically. Of course, the winners are the guys who got drafted and will be with a team in the NBA next season. And I think Johnny Furphy is going to get, if I had to guess, $6 million guaranteed, 5.5, something like that. Cap environment matters. Pacer situation matters. We'll see where that ends up shaking out for him. That is certainly a number to think about as you bake in the Pacers cap and tax space. And we'll see you on Jaylen Smith tomorrow. That will be a segment leading into our free agency preview. I'd like to have a guest. I haven't contacted anybody. I'll be out of town this weekend. I'll be on my computer as much as I can. So chaos coming for me and coverage of this team coming. So other interesting moves that happened at the draft that I want to talk about, and then get you ready for a little more free agency stuff by myself coming here on Locked On Pacers. And we're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Jump on over to, holy moly, Bronny James stuff on Locked On Pacers Locked On Lakers. Good Lord. Could be a place to go. Andrew Wiggins, maybe not playing for Team Canada because the Warriors are going to hold him out. Locked On Warriors could be a good place to go. No James Borrego in the Pistons coaching search. Talked about that one. Lots of places to go for your second listen as these transactions flow in. Shorter third segment to close this one out. Other stuff that mattered on draft night and looking ahead to free agency, a tiny teensy bit. Moves that I thought were interesting. Okay, first of all, we saw Kendall Brown and Oscar Tshiebwe at the Pacers facility during the draft. If you wanted an indication that they might be on the Summer League team. And the Summer League schedule came out. I'll talk about that in just a second, too. So one thing that happened is the Pelicans and Magic agreed to a trade that to you guys probably meant nothing or was completely pointless and uninteresting. That was the, let me find it, 47th pick in the draft. The Pelicans traded for it by sending out 2 future second-round pick swaps. So they didn't give up any picks. They just maybe made some picks worse. I say that to say there's a chance that package is valueless and that a pick got traded there. That was 47, I believe, which is before the Pacers went 49 and 50. And I only bring that up to say that is the kind of indication that the second round of this draft did not have a ton of value to teams, right? Everybody's looking for value and cheaper salaries and players, but I thought that was a very revealing maneuver about the value of what teams were thinking about with these picks. That ended up being Antonio Reeves, who went to the Pelicans. So just keep that in mind, that from like maybe pick your number 45, 40 onward might not be the most memorable draft. The other thing that happened right before the draft is the Hawks and Rockets made a trade that fascinated me. AJ Griffin went from the Hawks, who, to be clear, have tax concerns, which is a big factor here. They sent AJ Griffin to the Rockets for the 44th pick, I believe, maybe 43rd, I can't remember, pick in the draft. That was stunning to me. AJ Griffin was a lottery pick in 2022. Oh, he fell to 16th. He was a projected lottery pick that year. I liked him for the Pacers quite a bit. I had him in my top 10 that year. I think someone in his family passed away right before last season. He was much better in his first season than second season. He only played 20 games last year. There were some injuries. He shot 29% from the field. That obviously stinks. But his perception 2 years ago was pretty good. He shot 39% his rookie year and averaged 9 points a game. I probably, if I was the Pacers, would have traded 36 for AJ Griffin myself. Maybe a different future second form if he was available. Just take a flyer if they're giving him away. But obviously they can't offer minutes, and possibly he could be the 10th guy in the Rockets. I just found that trade very interesting in my own evaluation. He's 20. AJ Griffin is 20 years old, right? My own evaluation of him would have been to do that trade. I found that to be, if you want to talk about stuff the Pacers could have done or that I would have thought hard about, the 5 seconds for 26, I would have thought about, but probably not done. 36 for AJ Griffin, I would have thought about, and I probably would have done. I think those are the two moves that I thought, maybe the Pacers could have gotten involved there or thought about doing something similar to that themselves. But I did that for the first night of the draft too, if you want to go back to Thursday's podcast to get more there. Okay, one more news item to hit today. We'll talk more about Summer League closer to Summer League to preview it, but the schedule is out. Officially, they play the 12th, 14th, 16th, 18th, and then a TBD fifth game. My Lord, am I all over the place? Fifth game for Summer League. They play Brooklyn, Minnesota, Phoenix, and Denver. If you want to catch a sniff there. The highest profile player they play against might be Deron Holmes, Rob Dillingham, maybe. The Pacers did not have a first round pick. Their opponents do not have very high profile picks. So it will be interesting to see how Summer League shakes out for them. The times are all on my Twitter feed. We'll talk more about Summer League later. This is an early estimate for me about guys that I would think could be on the Summer League team. I don't know this yet. This is just a guess, but my current list is Jarris Walker, Kendall Brown, Mojave King, Tristen Newton, Johnny Furphy, Enrique Freeman, and then two reported ones from elsewhere. Josiah Jordan-James, who played in high school with Aaron Nesmith and worked out for the Pacers in the pre-draft process. He played at Tennessee. The Knoxville News reported he's agreeing to exhibit 10 with the Pacers. And then Scott Agnes reported Lance Jones from Purdue, as many of you know, has agreed to play for the Pacers in Summer League. I love Summer League. I can't wait for that. So free agency starts Sunday. Tomorrow will be a full show about the Pacers' outlook and situation. And I did a Bleacher Report live stream on Friday. You can find the VOD to that on my Twitter feed, talking about that and trade stuff, responding to some people's comments. Look, I still think that the thing to watch is Obi Toppin versus an external guy. They don't have a lot of wiggle room to move and meander beyond that being their thinking, unless Jaylen Smith opts out. And if he does, which has been the early reporting indications, but we don't know that yet. If he does opt out, they'll have a little more wiggle room to do stuff, but not a lot. Not a lot. And that might be all of the story worth watching as free agency approaches. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing if the Pacers can find a way to wiggle their way into a little more talent, or if their summer's just going to be Furphy in, McDermott out, and maybe Brown out for a third center or Smith out for a third center. It's going to be fun. And we'll have all the coverage right here on Locked On Pacers. Much more in-depth discussion of all this tomorrow with hopefully a guest. So Smith option decision, and then looking ahead at free agency, moves that could happen, yada, yada, yada. We'll talk about all the ex-Pacers that signed elsewhere. And then early in free agency, I want to have a much more detailed discussion about Siakam re-signing. Not a ton of time to do that with how many moves have happened in the last week, but it'll be fun. This will be fun for everybody, and I hope you get coverage that's satisfying you here on the Locked On Pacers podcast and writing on Forbes and SI. Thank y'all for tuning in today on your weekend. Hope this was enjoyable, informative, entertaining. Back tomorrow talking more Pacers offseason. Till then, everybody, have a wonderful day.